very much indeed. One of the things I want to let you know, the two students that we have here, Denora Gonzalez and Diamond Burham, are going to be passing out some forms for you to fill out. We're asking for you to make a commitment as you're here. You're filling out lots of forms, I know. But there's something you can do to make what's on this bumper sticker, it's never okay to hit a child, the new normal. Okay, that's, you can see the title at the top. What can I do to move toward the new normal if it's never okay to hit a child? I just want to make it so it's natural. It's not something we need to think about. It's not something we need to argue about. It's just normal. And let me ask you a question before I get in deep into this. How many of you were children? Okay. How many are still children? Well, that's good, because this is a very important part of what I'm going to present. Because what I found over the years in teaching courses on violence in the world of children is that students, college students, some of them adult students, I don't know how we transition between childhood and adulthood, believe, as we'll see here in a minute, and Alice Miller writes about this all the time, that people think childhood disappears when you turn 18. You change, nothing matters. Childhood doesn't count, it's irrelevant. Well, what's everybody been saying here all morning? Childhood matters. But how can we get people, other than the initiated here, to start thinking about childhood matters as a matter of course? So that every behavior, every action, every word they do is seen through that lens as they interact with children. That's a very important thing to remember. And what I want to bring and talk about today, let me read you one little quote. I got this yesterday through one of my listservs. It's about a video that an au pair who was born in France, works in Sweden. And this is her experience. She's made a video, a film about the experiences in France and in Sweden. She says, in Sweden, this is a country which works best for the whole world. There's greater freedom, more respect. I'm amazed by how much everyone respects each other here. How one listens and takes into consideration what others say. In my country, with children should obey. They should not talk back to their parents at all. It's like a battle, and there can only be one winner. How do you get one place where children are respected as the normal? In another place where adults interacting with children are enemies. This is a battle. It's not normal. And for us, what we need to start to do as we engage ourselves in this process of trying to bring about change is understand the deepness of that problem and the depth of that problem that overrides almost everything that we've been talking about. One of my students wrote the following on her exam after taking my course, Violence in the World of Children. And one of the things we refer to is something Jim Garbarino talks about and others as well, is the idea of children's work. Just as with women, we didn't think women's work was, quote, valuable until we had a women's rights movement that all of a sudden taught us that it was valuable. Now we assume that what do children do? It's trivial, it doesn't matter. But here's what the student wrote. Children's work is to make sense of the world, to learn skills and understandings to help them succeed successfully and interact with the world. The child-centered perspective is the perspective that values childhood and the child's importance. It views children as active, valued participants instead of passive, empty vessels. Adults usually look at children as beneath them, not giving them individuality or an opinion because they are viewed as children on a lower level. The child-centered perspective also places emphasis on the fact that childhood doesn't stop when you turn 18, but one's childhood affects your whole life. Here's the kicker. As we we get into corporal punishment. Violence in the world of children is defined as anything that interferes with children's work. She just defined children's work. Interacting with the world, making sense of the world. Meaning anything that hinders the process of children associating and becoming accustomed to the world is violence against them. According to Garbarino, he looks up. Violence in the lives of children leads children to develop survival strategies, which reduce the time they can devote to children's work and their ability to do that work. If you're facing struggling to survive, you're not becoming who you could become because your energies are focused on survival. So unless we look at this broadly, and corporal punishment is a key part of this, anything that interferes with children's work, development, and it's surprising that many definitions of abuse include child development. But we don't take it into consideration in our discussion. We think of physical violence, hurts children, see the injury. We don't look at the long-term developmental problems. And so this kind of provides a context for this. One of the questions I asked my students, is which is the longer period of your life, childhood or adulthood? Almost all the students answer adulthood. And then we say, well, why do you answer adulthood? And if you read Alice Miller, which my students read, she would say one of the reasons you don't answer childhood is longer is because you want to put your childhood behind you. You don't want to face the problems that you had in childhood. What we're dealing with as we get counter responses to a never okay to hit a child is a new normal is people's reactions to their own childhoods. This is a resistance to the thing that we're trying to overcome. I titled my talk, Force Field Analysis. If you're familiar with this, Kurt Lewin in social psychology, we look at forces that are driving the change. We want to change towards the new normal. That's the arrow on the top. We have to strengthen those forces. We have to also reduce the forces that maintain the status quo. And so we're doing two things here. We have to think of our actions, our individual commitments and the actions that we do in those terms. How can we reduce the forces that maintain the position that it's okay to hit a child? And how can we increase the forces that move towards the new normal of it's never okay to hit a child, so that we can move from one position of status quo to a new one that's less harmful to children? And I think part of it is that definitional problem that the student in that report addressed. And so for us as individuals trying to bring about change as change makers, we need to look at for us, individually, what are the most salient forces I as an individual can work on? As an educator, as somebody teaching courses on violence in the world of children, I see part of what I try to do is to get my students in a kind of primary prevention way to understand what happens in children's lives so that they're more aware, and then again, of not promoting things that prevent children from doing children's work. That to me is one way to kind of move towards the normal. Corporal punishment certainly wouldn't fit into it. Either would embarrass the children, humiliate the children, all the negative things, because they write about things. One of the questions Dr. Polanco used in her class years ago, and I've been using for years, is what are your experiences with human dignity? We talk about the Convention on the Rights of Children and human dignity. Write about experiences where your human dignity was supported by an adult when you were a child. Write about your experiences that were violated when you were a child. Here they're connecting their individual experiences with violence and violations of human dignity with their own lives and what they're studying. They now begin to see the connection between all the data that people are collecting, which is an incredibly strong, powerful, driving force in this whole movement. One of the things I find at conferences and in workshops, especially with professionals, is how many now are aware of the brain research, the pharmacological research, the impact research, the stuff that Liz has done. They're starting to, that impact stuff is starting to be part of their discussion. One of the things that I see always gets missed is this whole problem of this adult perspective versus the child-centered perspective. This is a diagram from the 2002, I believe, World Health Organization report on violence and health. And this is their ecological model for understanding child maltreatment. What's important here is their model included, as Jim talked about and others, the individual component of this model, nested in the relationship component of the model, nested in the community, nested in the societal values. But what they didn't have is what is in red. They didn't have this adult-centered perspective which dominates every other one of these. If you didn't have the adult-centered perspective dominating all of these other places, none of these other things would be promoting violence against children. And one of the things that I would argue, and here's kind of putting together this model of the old normal that is adult-centered, it's okay to hit children. The new normal, child-centered, it's not okay to hit children, is that we have to move from this definition of violence as physical harm to anything that interferes with children's work. We can't be bystanders, we have to be enlightened witnesses for children. Over and over again, the thing that often separates children who've had success, even in high-risk situations, is that person who was that enlightened witness who could provide support and safety somewhere along the line. Excuses. I mean, this drives me nuts. We have somebody who's a child abuse prevention educator, interviewed on TV. Well, what causes child abuse? Oh, it's parental stress. Why doesn't the person who's stressed punch their boss out? There's lots of places you could go to express your stress. They feel stress at work. They don't punch their boss, they come home and hit the kid. Well, the kid's there. They're the adult. They have the power. They can hit the kid. They can't hit the boss. They'll go to jail or get fired. Or the reverse, or both. So there's no excuses. Culture isn't an excuse. Race isn't an excuse. Religion isn't an excuse. Every form of violence has its excuses. A few years ago, we were debating whether torture was okay or not. What excuses can we give for torture? Violence against women. Well, it was okay at one point, then it wasn't all of a sudden. Why? Politics changed. Power relationships changed. The law still supports corporal punishment. What's the function of the law? As I see, the function of the law is to maintain power relationships between groups. That's what it does in everything that it does. Who has the power to control something? The law structures that. Certainly it does that with children. So the law is no friend of ours in terms of right now, the old normal, because it supports that. We need to keep trying to move that law, as people have said, towards the new normal. I just saw a thing about George's research. It was on the internet this morning. I got it in an email about how ritualistic the behavior of parents are with children. Why? Because they're operating from an adult perspective. They can do what they want to children, so it's non-thinking. It's not the kind of interaction with children where you look at the behavior, you try to figure out what's going on, you talk to the child, as they might do in Sweden. Here, the child does something bold. As George's research points out, it's more frequent, more immediate than parents even admit, because they don't even know they're doing it. People don't know alternatives. This is the work that Kersey and others who are doing the work on alternatives to hitting children. They devalue their own childhood experiences, as I said earlier. That's a very critical part. How do you get people connected to their own childhoods to face that harm that was done to them? They assume that adults don't learn from children. Robert Coles' work on the moral development of children. The research is being done at the Harvard, or I think it's Harvard, Child Study, Infant Study Lab. Yeah, with children who are making moral decisions about who they want to connect with. You want to connect with the little figure that's harming somebody or the one that's helping? They seem to go for the one that's helping in these images. Coles talks about it in my class. The students are very much aware that we shouldn't be talking about stages of moral development. Who made up stages of moral development? Certainly wasn't children, because they're the least developed in those categories, right? It was adults. So stages of moral development would say when you became an adult, you become more morally developed. Picture that with a picture of Ruby Bridges going, trying to integrate the schools in the South. What's happening? Here's this 10-year-old kid, dressed in white, walking into this school, muttering under her breath, facing these adults who were yelling and screaming and ready to kill her. Who's more morally developed? Coles asked Ruby Bridges, what were you saying? Were you yelling at these people? Were you mad at them? And she said, hell no. She didn't say hell. But she said, no. I was praying for them. Cole says, what? You were praying for them? She says, don't you think they need it? Who's more morally developed? The child or the adult? So in my class, we talk about stages of moral decay. Not stages of moral development. Because that's the reality of what happens. Not the image that we like to maintain. Okay. One of the other things I want to emphasize as well is our professional roles. Teachers, CPS workers. You see, I have a bumper sticker, right? I was going to put it here, but too big. It's never okay to hit a child. Give these to CPS workers. Put this on your office door. Put it on your note. Can't do it. And they fight. Because it's legal to hit your child. I said, did I say it was illegal to hit your child? I don't care. If it's legal, not legal, it's not okay. It's a whole different issue. That's why I say that's important as we get to the new normal. Okay, one of the things again we have to do is undercut those forces that keep us from going to the new normal, the cultural values, the social structure of stuff. Think about children's words that we talk about in community, in institutions, law, in schools, CPS work. You know, you're trying to maintain balance in an unbalanced power situation. You say, oh, we try to be fair to the parent and the child. Well, the situation is unbalanced. It's hard to do fairness in that situation, especially when the law supports one over the other. One of the things that's happened is, I don't know if you've seen or followed the development of no-hitting zones. I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. The one in, I think it's Kosar Children's Hospital. But the thing that's important about what they're doing the no-hitting zones. And they phrase it in their pamphlet as adults shouldn't hit another adult, no adult should hit a child, no child should hit an adult, no child should hit another child. They're not just putting one, they're putting all the hitting in there. But they don't just say the no hit, never okay to hit a child. They also then give you all the tips for effective discipline. What are the things that we have to do? We can't just say, oh, we're giving them all these tips for effective discipline, we're showing them all the alternatives. You've got to start every interaction with, before we start, just remember, it's never okay to hit a child. That's point number one. Now we can go on to other things. But if you don't say that, they still think that it's okay to hit a child because of all the things we've already talked about. So that's an important thing. I was talking with Ismail Wazan earlier, he's here from Dane County, about his deferred prosecution program, and I was reading some articles about it. One of them said, yes, a wonderful quote. It's never okay to abuse a child. I pointed out, well, you're close. You just got to get moving a little further. Okay, ahead. And I understand the politics of trying to do that and getting people to start talking and get the discussion going. But that's got to be your end at the end. That's got to be there somewhere. It's got to start coming out. Okay, here's some of the things that I see as kind of driving forces that are pushing us towards the new normal. The new knowledge and its dissemination that breaks down the unawareness that people have, brings new confidence for those of us pursuing the new normal. All the different kinds of research on the effects of corporal punishment, the dynamics, positive parenting, and this brain research, the ACE research, adverse childhood experience. All of this is starting to pull and come together. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, obviously, is another very important driving force in this. With these articles, its general comments, the global change, and the global initiatives work, and also prosecutions of child abuse cases. It's very difficult sometimes as you read information and reports on child abuse, and especially in the newspapers, but also even in legal documents. What were the dynamics of the problem? What happened? How is it linked to, quote, discipline? How is it linked to parental attitudes and behaviors in that regard? We tend to somehow shy away from it. We talk about what happened to the child, we don't talk about the context often in which it happens. And that needs to be much more elaborated. Now, other things that are happening in terms of actions. The no-hit zones I mentioned, Karen will talk more about. What's happening in higher education. Street perspectives, Asada later will talk about her work on the street, riding the subways, read her website, her Facebook page, it's wonderful. All the interactions she has on the subway with young people and with parents. Deferred prosecutions, which they're doing in Dane County. But also the other thing we can do, I think, to make this more powerful is our linking up with other organizations. Not that we necessarily just pursue their agendas, but we get our agendas as part of their agenda. Whether it's domestic violence or nonviolence or human dignity, linking with non-traditional groups. Now, finally, one thing I want to put out here before I finish is this is something I discovered. It's the lost commandment. Right? You know about the fourth commandment? Honor thy father and thy mother. And Moses went and got the commandments, and then when he came down, the people were so bad he broke them, and he had to go back and get another set. I don't know, but he did. And what I discovered was, when he came back and got the second set, there was something missing. He didn't get this other part, because it was too dangerous. See, the fourth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, we don't realize it, but it doesn't relate to children. It relates to adults dealing with their adult elderly parents. You should honor your mother and father when they're elderly. This doesn't deal with kids, but because we're adults and we get these children we feel is a threat, because we have this adult perspective, we say, oh, obey your parents, children. But the fourth commandment had nothing to do with that. It was this other part that was missing. Parents should honor and empower their children so that they, their children, and their children's children will live their own truths over long and authentic lives. That's the fourth commandment that's missing. Of course, I made all this up. But I really didn't. Because if you read, especially, one of the most powerful, when I first got introduced to this, I had a real problem when I was teaching about violence. I could see where, when people picked the targets of their violence, whether it was women or in race or hate violence or war, torture, whatever, picking the appropriate target was fairly easy. They were different, you made them different, you saw a difference. It was the other that you were doing the harm to, it wasn't yourself. But how did it relate to children? How did children become the other? Well, when I read Alice Miller, that's when I discovered how children became the other. Because you were rejecting not only the children in your presence, you were rejecting childhood in yourself. So if there's a message that we can all bring, one, it's never okay to hit a child, and please try to follow the new fourth commandment. Thank you.